the energy in the room is palpable. So I appreciate that. And we have some fantastic panelists and topics. I want to make a promise to you for this session. This is going to be the highlight of your day. But I need your help. How many of us in the last year have ended up going to conferences that were a complete waste of time? And we wondered, what the heck were we doing there? Hands up. Let me just see. Because God knows, I'm a journalist. I have to go to so many of them. And how many of you would like today, on the back of an excellent morning, to have an afternoon that makes this the best conference you've been to this year? Hands up. Okay, that's the kind of commitment I'm talking about. And I've got it from my moderators, from my speakers as well. So I'm going to promise you, in the time we have together, to talk about really the great question of our age, inclusive growth, the challenge of inequality that Thomas Piketty laid out so eloquently and in such great detail. We're going to take this up and look for answers. We're going to cast the story forward. As has already been explained, we're going to have the first half, we're going to look at bottom-up solutions. What are the tools that might come from technologies like artificial intelligence, and perhaps novel business models, new applications from the bottom up. And in the second part of my session, my next three panelists, we may talk a little bit from the top down. What can we do with innovations in governance, for example, and policies? But we'll get to that in a moment. I made a promise. I'm going to keep my speakers honest. No long-winded speeches from my stage, but equally, I need you to participate, because this is going to be an active session, and I'm going to start right now by posing an impromptu question. This is an audience poll, and I want every one of you to raise your hand, either in favor or against the question. It's okay if you're not 100% sure, but it's a forced poll. And it's about one of the ogres of our age, artificial intelligence. Much of the popular press has talked about artificial intelligence as a job killer, or worse, if you listen to people like Elon Musk, right? So here's the question. Over the next 20 years, I believe that artificial intelligence will create more jobs on balance than destroy. Vote if you agree with it, hands up, and I'm going to ask again who doesn't agree with it in just a moment. Hands up and sort of wave them around. Let's see who believes over the 20-year time frame. Okay. Now hands up, how many of you do not believe that? How many of you do not believe that? I'm going to give it maybe 40-60, meaning I think the no's at the moment, but it was a close run affair, gentlemen. So you have an audience that's open to persuasion. Let me start then jumping in with our experts on the topic. Joe, you are vice chairman of Alibaba Group. Your company has made some big investments in artificial intelligence. But sometimes people might not think it's an obvious place to look for AI. People think of some Silicon Valley companies or small startups. Can you give us a sense how you see the role that AI could play in improving people's lives? And what are you doing about it?
Yeah. I think you all know the ad, Intel Inside. So if you look at Alibaba today, it's very much AI inside everything we do, in every part of our business. I'll give you a few examples.
A couple.
Yeah, just a couple.
I promised them no speeches.
I was going to give 10, but you're going to limit me to maybe 2 or 3.
I've browbeat you down to 2. Okay, good.
Because the subject is about inclusive growth, so I'll talk about a few areas where you would normally not associate with AI. In the area of agriculture, we're helping farmers to detect crop growth and to have an early detection system to see if the crop is infected by disease or anything. And what it entails is using drones to take millions and millions of photos from aerial photos, and then train the machine to understand the growth characteristics of these crops. The machine can do a job with image recognition that is much more effective than the human eye. So that's an example, and that's being rolled out, and I expect that in the future will be widely used by farmers in China. Another area
is that pro bono, or is that a for-profit venture?
That is currently we're doing it at very little profit. but we hope that the Alibaba approach is to make sure it works first before we charge people. But then, obviously, if we create value for the industry, we will take our fair share of it. The other example is in the manufacturing sector. We're helping the world's largest solar panel company called GCL to improve their manufacturing yield. The process of making solar panels is very, very challenging when it comes to cutting glass. At what temperature do you cut it? At what angle do you cut it? And we feed all of those manufacturing parameters into the machine, and with AI capability, it will tell us what are the optimal ways to improve. This is all about data. This is all about collecting and also being able to manipulate and manage data in the factory manufacturing context. So we're doing something for the environment, making solar panels. And those are a few examples where we are being very active in helping industry and helping the agriculture sector.
Okay, so you've set us off on a good path. You've given a couple of examples. Farmers, clearly productivity of agriculture can be improved a lot in developing countries. And you didn't dwell on making me shop more efficiently, which I thank you for that. Although I'm sure you guys are all over that one. Let me turn to our second speaker. Antoine, your company is renowned in the AI space. Your gurus helped develop Siri, what ultimately became Siri, the voice assistant that Apple has, and so on. So you have a lot of domain knowledge in this area. What's your prediction on the industries that will be most importantly affected in a positive way by artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I'll start with the answer, and then I'll try to explain why. So finance, e-commerce, digital media clearly will be affected in a very positive way. So will consumer services generally. And finally, healthcare. So let me start with the first four. All of these are industries where you can quantify the outcome. And because you can quantify the outcome, it's easier for a system that is self-learning in nature and operating on a fast feedback loop to improve. And so obviously, where you will direct resources is where you can see an incremental improvement that adds to your bottom line. And that's where, in those sectors, e-commerce obvious, finance obvious, you can measure improvements, therefore you'll measure the performance of your system, and therefore these will be the areas where people will deploy AI first and foremost. The next one, and the big one, is healthcare too. And the reason why healthcare is important is because simply folks are willing to pay a lot of money to survive. And even though the regulatory framework, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, makes it hard sometimes and sometimes impossible to actually experiment with AI in the space, I firmly believe that the market forces will mean that in a few years we will see AI very pervasive, both improving performance and lowering costs in the healthcare space.
You touched on in passing the idea of evolution, of feedback loops, of learning. Can you tell me a little bit more? Because your approach to AI is a little bit different than the prevailing notion that the best AI is the one that has access to the biggest data sets.
Yes.
This is a common way of thinking about it. More data is better, more learning is better. Surely, therefore, China, for example, with massive data sets and great smartphone usage, is going to dominate. Your thinking is a little bit different. Help us understand that just so we know what we're talking about in the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, so the idea is, will data win the AI war? And I firmly believe that's not the case.
I would even say, why wouldn't data win? Better data and better analysis, why wouldn't it win?
That's right. So we humans, go around the world and collect data for the sake of collecting data. And we do not either make predictions for the sake of making predictions. The only reason why we humans collect data, build knowledge, and try to make predictions is for one single purpose, and it's to make decisions. Make decisions, learn from the outcome or the outcomes, and then hopefully make a better decision the following decision cycle. True AI is a system that learns from outcomes as opposed to learns from historical data. So sometimes, for example, in the case of in a diagnosis or trading in a finance space or driving, you'll need to train a system on data so that it doesn't fail the first time around. However, the true AI system, just like a human, is a system that is plugged in the real world, that learns from its actions and decisions and improves over time. And so, I do not firmly believe that the data hoarders will win this war. Who will win this war is the folks who put the algorithmic science at the core of their workflow and have that science learn from decisions and outcomes.
So you're not anti-data, you're just saying it's just a precondition on which you need to have better things. Yes, Joe, how do you respond?
Yeah, can I offer a perspective on this? I think we agree at some level. We maybe have some differences in other levels. To us, so AI is all about feeding data into computers so that they can generate outcomes. And then you can have real-time feedback loops. So think about a baby. Data is the nutrient. It's the food for the machine. So is data not important? I don't think that's the case. But I think what you're referring to is historical data may not be as important as real-time data.
That's exactly right.
I think that distinction needs to be made. What we're doing, for example, in the e-commerce context, I'm sorry, I have to talk about shopping, is when you open up an app to shop on the mobile phone on the Alibaba platform, when you're scrolling real time, that is data that we're capturing. And through a process that we call reinforcement learning, we are feeding you real time as to what the next item you should be seeing on the app. So that is real-time data, and I want to make sure people understand that distinction.
And it's a very important distinction, and in fact it's a distinction between data and interaction. And what you're talking about, Joe, is interaction, which is extremely important. We humans are intelligent in context, and it's often overlooked that in AI, the path to success is in-context intelligence.
I see that there are already some questions beginning to come in on the app. I thank you for that. I also want to go to the audience, so I'm going to ask our microphone runners to get ready, because I believe in hearing your voice, not just an anonymous SMS or email on my app. So please get a couple of very sharp questions ready for my panelists. But one of the themes that's emerging already, as foreshadowed by my polling question, that is AI killing jobs. Let's take it head on. You mentioned driving, autonomous driving, of course, very data intensive. One of the predictions is, of course, for the truck drivers in China or in America, if there were to be autonomous lorries, as we can expect Tesla to unveil one coming up soon, and others will follow. What is and I think your company, if I'm not mistaken, has a stealthy hedge fund that may put fund managers out of business if you have your druthers.
Not so stealthy anymore, I see.
Exactly. Well, the job-killing part is stealthy. You don't talk too much about that. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Why do you want to put all these hard-working fund managers out of work? What are they going to do? These poor suffering souls. And what's your plan to compensate them?
I will shed no tears for out-of-work fund managers. So seriously though, it's a given that AI will result in massive job displacement. It's a given. Now, as a society, do we want to embrace it? Do we want to embrace this piece of technology? We do. Why? Because it's augmenting enormously our own human capabilities. I'm sure the next panel will talk about the societal debate around what are we going to do with our time. But I'll try to make an important point about who is going to be displaced, because people talk about truck drivers. Yes. But I think there's a more important piece of the debate here, which is AI is going to creep into everybody's life and everybody's profession. And so what's going to happen? What's happened over the past 20 years, where incomes have stagnated in the service and manufacturing world, that's going to now creep into the white collar class, where people are going to have to now accept lower paying jobs because part of their job is taken over by AI. So the problem we face, I think, 10 years out, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years out, is suddenly you have, it's not the 30 or 40% lower class, and so to speak, individuals who have income problems, but it's suddenly 80% of the population.
Well, I mean, you've stated the problem very well, but I want you to help us understand the solutions, because you have a dog in this fight, right? You're at one of the best funded AI companies in the world, and cutting edge in some ways. And also, I would challenge you, simply saying axiomatically, this is better, therefore it's going to happen, not necessarily, because there is such a thing as a social compact. And we saw, for example, with Uber, there are places in the world where either labor unions or governments or consumer groups, et cetera, fought back. And so it's not so obvious that a technically elegant solution will prevail everywhere. There can be consequences. In the case of jobless middle-class people, I guarantee there will be a backlash. Do either of you want to jump in on how to address the problems of transition? And then I do want to go to the audience. Yes.
Well, I think the way to think about this is, what is AI good at? AI is good at complex, massive mathematical, computational problems that the human mind just cannot handle in a short period of time. And the speed and complexity with which algorithms can manage and spit out outcomes is very impressive and, frankly, better than the human mind. But in the area where emotional intelligence, what we call EQ, is required, that's where I haven't seen any examples of computers being able to overtake human beings. Take the DeepMind technology, AlphaGo. In the game of chess, or Go in that case, EQ is not relevant. But in the game of poker, yeah, it is relevant, because facial expressions matter. And obviously, you can train the machine to read faces and all of that. But I think it's going to be a much more difficult task. So I'll give you an example of future jobs that could probably go away versus jobs that will continue to stay. I used to be a lawyer. So there are different types of lawyers. Tax lawyers, for example, probably will go away, because tax law is a very technical skill set. It involves reading volumes and volumes of law and being able to think through very elegant, structured solutions. But how about a trial lawyer? As long as there's a human value system that you should be judged by your peers, and there is a jury of 12 people, human beings, trial lawyers will not lose their jobs. So I think we have to think in terms of certain types of jobs will remain. High EQ level, high personal touch kind of jobs, like ski instructor, nursing, will continue to do well. So I think also in terms of thinking about the effects of AI and automation, an economy that invests more in the service sector will probably come out a little bit ahead than others.
Okay, so you've given us a few bright spots to look for future jobs. Let me see. There's a lady here with their hand. Let's get the microphone to her. A couple of ground rules. Please give us briefly your name and affiliation, and make it a question rather than a long-winded statement. Nobody likes a gas bag.
Thank you. My name is Preeti. I write a column for an Indian newspaper, Mint. I was very curious to ask Joe, this thing that you talked about, AI can play an early detecting system of crops. Is it a technology that can, you can see partnering in India, because 65% of India is dependent on agriculture? And another question is that if you had to...
Let's stay with one question in the interest of time. What do you say, Joe?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
One more sentence on that. How would you do it?
Well, if there's a need, if there's a problem, AI is there to solve the problem. And in the process, you're creating value. So we're all, technology companies today should think about how to solve problems rather than, how to connect the world and all those very sort of very large philosophical questions. I think we're here to solve problems, and AI is definitely the tool to help us do that.
There's several questions from the electronic system that really connect with this technology, or this bundle of technologies, technology companies, and ethics. In particular, for example, privacy, data protection is the flavor of some of the questions. Can you two give an answer to those? And these questions are generally concerned about this, as is the popular meme these days. What is the right way to think about the problem of data protection? I mean, I disclose an interest. The Economist ran a cover story just last week on facial recognition, pointing out that this raises concerns in terms of what is the right limit on technology companies, on the use of data, and the potential for abuse. So what is the right role, for example, for government?
So I'll give the answer that many folks have given, which I think is around the question of value. Are you willing to give your data in exchange for value? And I think to date, most people are willing because they're getting value. And I believe, therefore, that overall that trade-off is positive. Now, I think AI has the opportunity. I'm not asking the question, but I'm still going to say it. AI has the opportunity to begin to shift that balance, and let me explain why. Today, we carry smartphones, which really are not very smart. They're pretty dumb. The smartphone is an access tool. The intelligence is right here. So the day when these devices become truly smart, and they become your proxy, like in a movie, Her, if you recall the science fiction movie of a couple years ago, the day these devices become really smart and you have control over that proxy in a virtual world, and that proxy does your shopping, does your booking, your banking, your bookings of meetings, and so on and so forth, and you control it as opposed to a Google controlling it, or an Apple controlling it, or a Tencent controlling it, then at that point you recover power and leverage. And in fact, you begin to disintermediate brands and services. The issue is a business model. Nobody has come up with a business model today to inject AI here or in a cloud that is yours as opposed to somebody else's. But smart people will come up with that model eventually, and the balance or the balance of powers will be restored. In my view.
You posit a view that future technological progress will present new business models that will ultimately empower the individual.
Yes.
But at the moment, what we see in the free Darwinian world of capitalism, especially in America, is that's not what's happened. My Google searches are apparently free, but my data is taken for, I would gladly pay for my Google searches with dollars, but that's not a choice offered to me.
That's right.
And so the argument is made that there's too much concentration in technology companies, and perhaps there is a role for a new kind of antitrust with a broader view than simply price.
But if you allow me, and you compare that concentration against what happened in the 60s or 70s or 80s, today we have less concentration. You have Apple, you've got Google, you've got Facebook, you've got Uber that came out of nothing, which is a technology company, versus IBM in the 60s, versus two companies, Apple and Microsoft in the 80s. So I would venture the opposite. I would venture that technology gives companies and people the ability to build business models very quickly, novel ones. And I also venture that the reason why Google and Facebook are buying so many startups in the AI space is because they are fearful of their own mortality.
Joe, do you have a quick comment on this? Obviously, you're...
Well, I think I just want to say that the people who are sort of privacy concerned activists need to understand that everything is a balance here. What is the value of data? Data is valuable only when it's aggregated, analyzed, and to some extent shared. And I want to put an asterisk on that word shared. It's not exchange. So for example, Alibaba, we have a lot of data about our users. We will never sell our data. But the way we work with data that share with others is we have a partnership with a rural cooperative that lends money to farmers. And we're able to use their data set and our data set to put them together to develop a lending model that manages the credit risk. In that context, neither of us can see each other's data. Everything is encrypted, and they operate on a cloud somewhere. And so you could definitely have ways to protect data. Now, the question is really more of an ethical issue, is how companies behave, how company managements behave. They need to establish trust with the community, with the people who entrust them with data. And that's really the most important question.
So we've heard from 2 companies involved in the field that they're coming up with interesting solutions without government. I'm seeing in the litany of questions coming from the floor a deep amount of skepticism. I'm not going to go through all the questions, but it's pretty clear that lots of people think there's a role for government in this. We're not going to solve this in the 5 minutes that's remaining, but at least you've been able to hear from the cutting edge what might be. Let's just remember, there is a history, as with the Microsoft case in the United States, that technology evolution makes these sort of legalistic approaches sometimes irrelevant by the time legislation is brought into force, simply because of the pace of disruptive innovation. We are living in an age of extraordinarily rapid evolution in technologies themselves, and so it might require new and nimble approaches in governance, which we want to talk to our next panelists about in a few minutes. Let me see if I can get one more question from the floor. There's a quick hand in the front row or in the first table. A short question, short answers from my speakers.
All right, thank you.
Please identify yourself, sir.
Piyush Gupta with DBS Bank. I would suggest that one of the actual negative outcomes of data is it is actually exclusionary and not inclusionary. In our own industry, the more insurance companies have knowledge about health conditions, the more you'll find people not getting insurance. The concept of insurance is socialized risk. More data actually is the antithesis of socialized risk.
Okay, so that I'll put the question mark at the end of that comment.
No, it's not.
What is the gentleman wrong?
Respect the comment. I think it's not a question of inclusiveness or not. It's really a question of pricing. Financial institutions that take risk can always decide to set the right price to be more inclusive. All right. So if you want to include more so-called sort of lower quality borrowers or lower quality insureds because you have more visibility on the data, you just set a different price for your product. So I don't think it's a question of being inclusive and not inclusive. It's really a question of pricing.
A quick follow-up?
Nothing to add.
I would say, just in the course of my reporting, I share your concerns, sir, from the floor. But there are just an example. There's this disruptive, innovative force in insurance, one of the most traditional of industries. There's a startup company out of Columbus, Ohio, called Root Insurance, that is offering consumers who use Teslas with the autopilot feature. There's now enough testing to show that it's much, much safer when their drivers use the autopilot feature. So this is a product you can get yourself if you live in the United States and the right states, where that data information is actually improving the consumers' lives, in fact, making them safer, but also producing discounts. I'm not touting this company, but it's just an anecdote that I offered to show that the picture is going to be complex going forward, and it's going to be quite a challenge for our regulators. I have to reflect the mood of the questions again. Thank you for all the questions sent digitally, which keeps coming back to the challenge of ethics. Can a world which is increasingly infused, if not dominated by AI, can AI have a soul? Does it make sense to talk about the ethics of AI? Isn't that the ultimate last redoubt of humanity? Question to you, Joe, and with a quick follow-up.
I think people get into this ethical question because the worry is that the machines will become more smart over time than human beings, and at the end, this whole idea of singularity, that one machine will take over the entire world, right? And but I think this is more of a philosophical question rather than a practical question. Because to really believe that machines will over time become smarter than the human brain or human beings overall is you have to make a very important assumption. That assumption is that we know the limits of the human brain today, but we don't. The fact is humans also become smarter and smarter. So my belief, it's more of a belief rather than a prediction, because it's a philosophical question, is that human beings will always be running faster than machines. We're underestimating our own brain power if we believe that there's going to be a single computer that rules the world.
Antoine, you're actually undermining Joe's thesis by creating machines that are getting smarter, evolutionary AI. Should we be worried about you?
You be the judge. But so I actually disagree with Joe that respectfully, that machines will not overtake us. However, I think there is a meaningful, hopefully socially acceptable path towards that, and which will hopefully result in us incrementing ourselves as opposed to us fighting against ourselves. So. And here's what it is.
Briefly.
Yes. We're not going to wake up one day with the machines being sentient. It's not going to happen this way. We're going to grow into this. And as a result of this, we're going to build trust in the system, in the machines. The way we're going to go about doing this is by progressively understanding the appropriate regulatory framework in each of the sectors in which AI is deployed. For example, it's happening in transportation now. For example, it's happening in government now. In finance, it's beginning to happen. We have sandboxes in healthcare. Okay, all of that is happening, and so we will see these regulatory frameworks evolving first, which will make us comfortable with machines doing things for us, and eventually it will be symbiosis as opposed to opposition.
Well, that's actually an excellent note to end on, because our next panelists are going to get right into that sandbox and explain how we can take on this brave new world. Please give my first two panelists a nice round of applause. Thank you for joining us, and I invite you to step off the stage. And I ask my next panelist, please, to come up on stage and join me. Thank you, gentlemen.